You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today we have another show lineup for y'all. We're going to talk to an amazing guest today, Dr. Hank Laskey. He is an amazing person. He has an amazing book, The Global Pharmaceutical Industry, Economic Structure, Government Regulation, and History. So today we're going to talk about not just his backstory, but we're going to talk about everything with pharmaceutical. First and foremost, Dr. Hank Laskey. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Shania. Thank you for having me.
Man,
you got that biblical name, I see.
Oh, yeah. Yes. You're right about that, man. Both my grandparents were the ones responsible for that, so I appreciate that, man.
Okay, but your mother signed the birth certificate.
Well, touche. You're right about that. She co-signed what they came up with, so you're right about that.
Yeah, okay. All right, yeah. Don't want to take anything away from your grandparents.
Yes, sir. Well, we have you on today on Army Focus Radio, and we're going to talk about everything with your background with the pharmaceutical industry, but also your book that I mentioned earlier in the show. But kind of start with the audience about your history and your experience, because you have taught this too in courses and classes. You were an MBA director, Pharmaceutical and Chemical Studies at that point in time. Can you kind of touch on your career and how that has prepped you to write this book?
Okay, you want me to talk about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I first got involved with the pharmaceutical industry when I was an undergraduate student at Clemson University and a chemistry major. And luckily, one of the graduates of Clemson University during World War II was the commander of the supply lines and logistics of the European theater, General Littlejohn. And at the end of the war, he brought back a kind of an encyclopedia sort of thing called Berichte, which was a compendium of the unified German chemical societies. And what happened was, at the end of the war, the Allies made public property out of all the Axis patents. So where the industry was concentrated in Germany, big time, we took all their patents, and now we have an industry that is basically 80% of it is in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan, those very countries where we fought that war. So I suppose you could say to some extent that I was given my gift by General Littlejohn. Later, when I became when I finished my PhD, I taught in a bunch of schools around the world, and I began to realize then something that really solidified in my mind many years later, and that was that chemists working in the laboratory or any phase of discovery research, they can't talk to the marketing people very well. And the marketing people, just the same going the other way, they can't talk to the chemists or the scientists very well either. And especially in this day and age, it is critical that the marketing people talk to the scientists in the laboratory. It's just critical for many reasons, mainly to lower cost. But as you mentioned, I later became the MBA director of the Pharmaceutical and Chemical Studies program at Fairleigh Dickenson. And I got a bunch of doctors, MDs, physicians in my classes trying to get an MBA degree. And I also got business majors who were pursuing an MBA degree as well in the pharmaceutical sciences. And what I found is those guys couldn't talk to each other. I mean, the first time I ever talked about profit, those MDs looked at me like I was the God reincarnated, Jesus, the devil reincarnated, I should say.
Yeah.
And that lasted for weeks. Wow. Because they just didn't get economics at all, just like the business students didn't get chemistry or microbiology or whatever it is. So then it took me 15 years to write this book, Shania. 15 years. And what I hoped to accomplish was to provide a broad-based description of the industry, its economics, and of course, government regulation, but also its history, so that those two sides of the fence, kind of, sort of, so to speak, could read it and talk to each other, which is just critical, like I say, in this day and age, as we pursue all sorts of new diseases and seek to lower costs at the same time. So that's I also taught inside of each of the companies, the big ones, Bayer, Johnson and Johnson, Schering-Plough, Pfizer. And I found the same basic problem. There I had the hardcore scientists, but I also had their finance people, their accountants, et cetera. And gosh almighty, just getting those people to talk to each other about what I wanted to talk about, what the class was all about, was difficult. So that's another reason. It's probably the main reason why I wrote the book, is to get the industry to talk to one another.
Listen, I'm Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, Dr. Hank Laskey. And man, you mentioned scientists. You have I guess you can say, a famous phrase that a lot of people probably will catch sooner or later, but it's nerds live in labs around the world, and that they're the base of the pharmaceutical industry. Can you explain a little bit about that statement to our audience?
Okay. Words are a funny thing. And something that I talk about in my book is the different languages of the world, cultural values, religions, etc. And when I use that word nerds, I am not using it in the funny sense that we sometimes use it, or any kind of a derogatory sense. I am trying to show the business people that these are really serious scientists. I mean, these guys, if they don't have a master's degree, they've got a PhD, and they've had it for a long time. And they've done a lot of research, and they've produced a lot of drugs, or candidate drugs. So when I say nerd, I mean, I used to be one, I probably still am. Certainly when I was a chemistry major and synthesized intermediol from corn, I was, and I probably still am, because I can read this stuff and I can understand it. So I guess you would say, if they are nerds, then I'm a little bit schizophrenic, because I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and I have a Master of Science degree in management. And then my PhD is in marketing. So, I stand in the campus with one foot in the College of Sciences and the other foot in the College of Business. And I'll tell you, Shania, there are not a whole lot of people like me. I know that. I've experienced it myself. Taking on a task of writing about all the different disciplines of business, the disciplines of marketing, and then talking about chemistry in a way that doesn't offend the non-chemist, but giving enough insight so that chemists themselves can see what I'm talking about. Let me give you an example. There are just a handful of feedstock materials for the pharmaceutical industry. And how many of the scientists inside the laboratories, the young ones in particular, I'm talking about, because this book is primarily intended for the young ones who are moving up in the industry or who want to change positions in an industry or even enter the industry. But to study, both the business side in this book and the chemistry side in this book, and then the history, you got to be a little bit schizophrenic, Shania. So I think I turned in my nerd boots and I became a schizophrenic. But 15 years it took me to do it. Like I said, I didn't go lightly into the night, as so the saying goes.
And this book also illustrates a kind of behind the scenes look for people who are not even in this field to kind of get a taste of what actually goes on and what happens. And you mentioned regulation. When it comes to policy and politics and all that good jazz, what general snap picture for the audience, what's the process like for the development of new drugs and for them to be approved and to enter the market?
Okay. Here in the United States, it's the Food and Drug Administration. In Europe, in the European Union, it's under the Enterprise Directorate General. And in Japan, it's largely in the prefects themselves. But generally speaking, they tend to follow our FDA, or Food and Drug Administration. Because we're the largest market in the world, the FDA is the largest, regulatory agency in the world. The rest of the world tends to follow their lead. But also in the international conferences on harmonization of regulation, which have been going on for a long time now, all over the world, different cities every year, they'll have their meeting and they'll try to work out a way to, keep everybody happy so that when you apply for a license to sell a drug across state boundaries in the United States, you need FDA authority. And what the FDA does is they assemble a group of outside experts in the field from wherever they may be, and they have them evaluate the clinical data. Now, let me get into that in a second, but the first time I ever heard about clinical data, I wondered to myself, what in the world is clinical data? What does that mean? And basically what it means is doctors are involved and patients are involved. And where you go to see the doctor is a clinic. Not necessarily by that name. It could be a doctor's office, but clinical data involves physicians who are hired by the drug manufacturer or the marketing company, but typically the manufacturer at this stage. And they, what happens is these meetings take place and the data is put in front of these guys, and they know what's going on before they get there. Yeah, in the FDA meeting, the experts in the field, they know what's going on. So when they read the stuff, the results of the trials, the clinical trials, and I'll talk about that in a minute. When they read it, they pretty much know what's going on. So they look at that data, and it takes them a day or two or three. They spend the night in Washington, and then they make a recommendation. And that goes before the FDA commission, and the FDA commission votes, and either it's up or down. Now let's talk about clinical trials and clinical data. The industry is basically divided into four parts. There's the discovery research, which is the nerds and the scientists. And then there's manufacturing, which is some nerds, but largely chemists and chemical engineers, figuring out how to scale it up, et cetera. And then there's the actual manufacturing of the drug at scale, and then the marketing. So I want to focus on the development stage. That's the second stage. The discovery of the biological activity has already occurred, probably in an animal model. Now, in order to go to man, you have to have safety and efficacy in at least 2 species of animal. And if you do, then you get the go-ahead to go to man. And that's when the clinical trials start. So the doctors will recruit their patients. They know what kinds of diseases they have, of course, and they recruit them into a clinical trial, which might have 100,000 people in it. Some of these studies in Scandinavia are that big, and I wonder how many people are there in Scandinavia. You probably got 1 in 10, but they're big studies. And they evaluate the safety of the drug, number 1. And then number 2, the efficacy of the drug, how well it works. And if you get approval on both of those, if you get good data on both of those, and you put the good data before the committee and the FDA, and you get the go-ahead, what you get the go-ahead for is the actual manufacturing. That's kind of a hurdle. That's a hurdle, but you have to give them the safety data, then the efficacy data, then you get to go to phase 3 trials. The previous work was done phase 1, and that's the discovery, and phase 2, that's the development. But now you're scaling up into manufacturing, and you need a large supply of the drug. So you can go to phase 3 trials, which is you got to keep track of what's going on, but you can go to a larger base of people, a larger bunch of consumers, or patients. And so then at that development stage, you go to phase 3 trials, and that's the big ball of money, man. I mean, look at what Moderna reported today. I mean, or maybe it was yesterday evening, they reported success in a phase 3 trial of a respiratory syndrome virus, the RSV virus that's sweeping the world right now. They reported success in a phase 3 trial. Well, man, if you have success in a phase 3 trial and you put that in front of the commission, and they vote on it, you get to go to marketing. That's when your manufacturing really does start to kick in, man, and you're making a lot of this stuff, and you're distributing it in as big a market as you can produce the drug for, and you already know how many people have the disease because your marketing people were involved. Now, I want to make that point again. I made it a couple of minutes ago. The marketing people increasingly must be involved in the other phases of the pharmaceutical industry because they know the market, they talk to the doctors, they get the consumer feedback, the patient feedback, all of it. Does that answer your question, Shania?
Oh, yeah, definitely does. And speaking of just the market, consumers, and the corporate world, the process of research, what does the relationship looks like with the scientists and the corporate brand, whatever X brand is that wants to do this? What does that process look like? Do they have meetings and say, hey, I have an idea to treat this or do this? What does that look like from someone on the outside looking in?
Okay. First of all, discovery research takes place in only about 10 countries of the world. The innovation in drugs is limited primarily to the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. So you have people who have done research at probably a university in a graduate program, and they have gotten some ideas about drug development, and they are hired by a pharmaceutical company, or they start a lab of their own. And there are a lot of these labs. Let me just say that during COVID-19, when Pfizer put its drug on the market, they got it through BioNTech, which is a husband and wife owned company, basically a laboratory, a research laboratory in Germany. And Pfizer had a relationship with BioNTech, like it has with many, many research laboratories, including its own. And Pfizer, all of the big companies are basically marketing machines that are being, restrained, so to speak, like a wild horse at the reins by government regulation. And if politicians, rather than physicians, decide what medicines you can get, something's wrong. Something's really wrong, and I think we're facing that situation today. But to get back to the discovery research question specifically. They typically go through graduate school. They have some ideas. They either get hired. I know some guys that did the laboratory of their own near Boston, and they started developing their own protocols and things to develop a specific line of product. And Pfizer, for example, stepped in and gave them a lot of money. And in exchange, just like with BioNTech and COVID-19, you enter into a contractual relationship with the marketing behemoth. And you say, if you strike it rich in the laboratory, so to speak, that you will market it through the marketing behemoth, and you will share in the profits. And the husband and wife team that owns BioNTech in Germany, they are very, very rich today because their share of the profits was enormous. So the deals that are made between the scientists and the largest drug companies in the world, the marketing behemoths, so to speak, they're good contracts. If you think that you've got the drug to end all, cure all of cancer, let's just say, and you put it in a one species of animal model and it looks okay, you put it in another species and it looks okay, and then you go to the big drug company and you say, look, I think we ought to develop this thing, and they'll consider it. And if they put it into development, and man, those clinical trials just stink, well, then, you're in default on your contract, and, the marketing company is just going to step away from you. But that doesn't mean they're going to turn their back on you. If the directors, the vice presidents, the executive people of the corporation, the marketing corporation, if they still think that this line of research has merit, then they will continue to fund the laboratory, at least partially, and go forward. And many of these laboratories, they exist like that, year after year after year, filing for grants from the large pharmaceutical companies. And they'll file for grants, apply for grants for several different pharma companies. just on the hopes that one of them will bite. And once they've got one, then typically they'll go multi-year contracts with them. So does that answer your question?
Oh yeah. I mean, you listen to this right now, you need to go get the book, the Global Pharmaceutical Industry, Economic Structure, Government Regulation, and History. We're talking to our guest, Dr. A Laskey. And yeah, this is something I think people should really dive into. What would you say to the young minds out there, specifically young minds across the world? Because I think we can use all minds in this practice and in this industry, if you will. Your book,
Yeah.
it dives into the introduction for those who may be interested to enter or to take off into the industry, whether they are from a perspective of business development or they're literally, doctors, what have you, who are trying to excel. What was wisdom that you give to those listening right now who may be interested to dive deeply and take this as a learning curve?
Yeah. The young people in particular, those who might be in an undergraduate program or even a master's program, and they haven't really decided what they want to major in. Let's say they're juniors in college, and they've had a few electives and things, and they like chemistry pretty well, or microbiology, or any of those sciences, to include agriculture. Medicinal botanicals are a really big deal in many countries of the world. But if you're thinking about what you want to do in your life, with your life, well, in the first place, if you're like me, you want to do good with your life. And you can do good in the pharmaceutical industry. In spite of the fact that it's heavily regulated, and probably because it's heavily regulated, you can make a beautiful salary, some of the highest in the world. Not only that, but you'll get wonderful retirement packages and stock options and all kinds of things that will make your life happy, so to speak, outside of the laboratory, or even if you go into the marketing of pharmaceuticals, or even the development and manufacturing, and you master that particular discipline or job description, and you're a little bit bored, and you'd like to take on more responsibility with your life, make more money, etc., then I would read the book, because it's going to give you a breadth of knowledge, where you are going to comprehend so many things when you're done. I mean, like I said earlier, it took me 15 years to write this book, and it's jam-packed with information. I've had critics on shows like yours, Shania, say to me that it is very readable, that it's very easy to understand, that it looks like a textbook, but it reads like a novel. Those were Logan Crawford's words in an interview he did with me about a week or so ago. And I agree. I agree. I mean, I tried real hard, man. I chose every one of those words carefully. Let me give you just a quick example. Mm-hmm. My wife and I own a house down in Puerto Rico. I used to be a surfer as a boy. And when they decommissioned Remy Bass, we bought a house. Anyhow, so we go there quite frequently, and I brought my book down there, and I've asked about who wants to translate this into Spanish. And I finally found a guy who, translates legal documents. So he's very picky on his choice of words. And he took the book from me. He started reading it. He comes to see me the next day, and he says, "How do you expect me to translate this?" And it was a sentence in the book that goes something like, Uh, Nowhere will you find more dangerous something or other than in the world of political economy, where money and power, it's fraught with whatever I said at the on in that thing. And he didn't know how to translate that. I mean, he really got hung up on the use of the word fraught.
Mm-hmm.
So, words are real important, man. I mean, and when you start talking about different languages, I mean, think about this for a second. In the European Union, um, when before you get your drug approved in the whole EU, not in a specific country, you could do that as well. You could apply, in an individual country, or you could go for the whole EU, or you could do both. Um, but when you do that, they have to produce the documents in like 11 different languages.
Yeah.
And that's picky stuff, man. I mean, words have a lot of meaning. So I chose them very carefully. I almost, suffered over every single word. That word fraught, I meant it big time. I mean, nowhere is anything fraught like government and economics and the power brokers of nations, inside administrations. Man, that's fraught with dangers of many kinds, which is probably what I said, because of the money and power involved. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, this is perfect. By the way, listen, I'm Focus Radio talking to Dr. Hank Laskey, and man, it sounds like this is just something that people can really take their time to kind of learn, especially if they are outside of this industry. Last question I have for you, someone who is not in this industry, clearly is not their career, but they want to dive into it deeper and learn more. Of course, we want them to get your book. But what would you suggest that they tap into if there are other resources out there for them to use additionally?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of different resources. First, I give a lot of references in the book. So if there's anything you're interested in, I've got a reference for it. But I would suggest that they look at the big corporations' websites, and what their job opportunities are, and what they're hiring for. You're going to find, I think I looked at it yesterday or the day before, and Pfizer, for example, has over 3,000 openings right now, that they're trying to fill. So, go to the big corporations, the big pharmaceutical companies, and of course, Pfizer is the biggest in the world. And there's AstraZeneca, in the Rhine area of Switzerland and Germany, and there's GlaxoSmithKline in England, and then there's Takeda in Japan, and practically everything else is in the States. Maybe one or two others are in Europe. Johnson and Johnson, Abbott Labs, Eli Lilly, they all have websites. They all are looking to hire good people. And, I was asked a question one time about what types of people succeed in this industry. And I think it's just dedication. If you want to dedicate your life to something that has meaning, maybe you want to go into marketing. Gosh almighty, there are a lot of opportunities there. Maybe you are in the digital world. Artificial intelligence is a big deal right now, especially in the processing of symptomology in a clinic to give you a diagnosis, and prescribe a treatment. And when you have to sample the human being to do that, it's very helpful, but you must sample that human being. And I don't know if you paid attention to the Elizabeth Holmes trial, um, but she just ballyboozled so many billionaires and big investment companies because she claimed that her company was going to take a little bitty drop of blood and run all these tests and give you all this information. Well, that's phooey. You can't do that. She couldn't do it. Her company couldn't do it. And it seemed to be some kind of scheme between her and her boyfriend, anyhow, ultimately. But she was at Stanford. I mean, that's one of the top business schools in the country. Anyhow, you have to sample the human being. And that place where you do that, it requires nurses. They typically do that. Laboratories like LabCorp or Quest that process so much blood and urine in the course of a week on machines that do spectroscopy of one form or another. So if you want to go into just even the medical sciences in general, hospital management, the healthcare industry is a big industry. And I ask you, quite frankly, where does the healthcare industry stop and the pharmaceutical industry begin? That's like asking, where does the chemical industry stop and the pharmaceutical industry begin? Or the agriculture company and the agriculture industries and the pharmaceutical company for natural products. So, again, there's a breadth of opportunity.
That'd be like me.
And like I say, I don't think you can find higher paying salaries anywhere unless it was back in the day at Google or Apple or something like that. But those days are gone. And the pharmaceutical industry, it's stable. It will be there 25, 35 years from now when you retire, and you're going to retire well. Let me ask you this, Shania, where are you located?
San Antonio, Texas.
Okay, San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in outside Philadelphia, in what we call the Delaware Valley or the Delaware River Valley. And there are pharma companies all over the place here. And you go out to Pittsburgh and or Wilkes-Barre, they've got coal and petroleum and natural gas and all the feedstocks. So Pennsylvania is a rich state because of this pharmaceutical industry that it houses, as is New Jersey. And I every day I drive around this place and I look at the housing developments and wealthy people live here. And I think to myself, what did it take to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why did the banks lend the money to buy all these houses and write all these mortgages? If you can't prove that you can make the payment, you're not going to get the mortgage. And typically at these houses, they're nice cars, not Ferraris or Lamborghinis, but nice cars, and several of them. So they have families, they've raised families and they've done very well. They are retiring. They are basically the baby boom that came after World War II. They are retiring and they have all the experience in the world and they'd be happy to sit down with you and talk to you about it. All you have to do really is indicate your interest. And there are different meetings you can go to. The American Chemical Society puts on some great meetings in this area, seminar type meetings. The American Marketing Association puts great ones together. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers Association of America, Pharma, they do fantastic work with government and regulation and lobbying. If you're interested in that kind of thing, lobbying your congressman, well, believe it or not, there's a job for you too. And like I say, the baby boomers is retiring, and there's a big demand, as you probably know from the economy in general, where they talk about inflation and the workforce and the size of the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people are getting laid off, but a lot of people are choosing retirement. And they did that at the beginning of the pandemic and during the pandemic. They just liked being at home with their kids, and they had fabulous retirement packages. So they retired. Why not? And they left the pharmaceutical industry hanging, so to speak. So if you have a commanding knowledge of this industry, like I believe you will get if you read the book, a little bit of this and a little bit of that goes a long way. And you're interested and you're dedicated, you want to do good with your life, from nursing to engineering, and from chemistry to marketing. You can find a wonderful job for yourself in this industry globally. Which country do you want to work in? Where do you want to go and travel to? It's a global industry, it's fabulous. So, no matter who you are, really, especially the elderly as well, and all the elderly, for the most part, in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan are on a bunch of pharmaceuticals. You would be interested as well to know about the industry that supplies these things for you and why you have to pay so much money, why you need a prescription, all of that.
You've been listening to I'm Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Dr. Hank Laskey, and his book, The Global Pharmaceutical Industry, Economic Structure, Government, Regulation, and History. You can get this book on Amazon. Man, I want to say thank you, Dr. Hank Laskey, for taking time to schedule to talk on I'm Refocused Radio. What call to action will you want our listeners to take?
Oh, wow. Where I am, if they're listening out there in the Delaware River Valley, we hear you crying in the night, and we're doing the best we can to get you the best people available. And by that, I mean people with an interest who are dedicated and want to do something with their lives. But besides that, I think I've said it all, Shania. I want to thank you very much. I enjoy your program. In preparation for this interview, I listened to several of your interviews that you've done before, and I like where you're at. I like where you go with this stuff. So thank you.
Well, say thank you and appreciate your time for not just being on the show, but sharing your experience. And I think you gave a lot of people some motivation, especially the young and bright minds out there. And, if you're kind of...
let me say something about your audience in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Texas is growing, man, if you don't already know it. Mm-hmm. It's booming. It probably has the best economy in the United States. And there's a lot of oil and natural gas there. The feedstock materials are there. If the industry does not exist there, and look on the websites, where are they located? If it's not there, it should be there. Maybe you want to think about that.
Man, appreciate that insight right there. Once again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Hank Laskey. You can get his book on Amazon. It's The Global Pharmaceutical Industry, Economic Structure, Government, Regulation, and History. If you appreciate this amazing open book study, if you will, on this episode on Refocused Radio, make sure you go support his book and support what he does. If someone needs to find you or will want to find you online, if they can, how can they do so?
I'll give you my personal email address. I am in the process of preparing a website. And again, it took me 15 years to write the book. It'll probably take me 15 to do this website. but it's not quite ready yet. So let me give you my email address. It is my name, Hank Laskey, HankLaskey, S as in Sam, at Bell South, BELLSOUTH.net. And if you wonder why I've got a Bell South telephone number, it's because my wife and I have a small farm in South Carolina where we raise medicinal plants and we extract the essential oils. And that's about where we are right now. We haven't really got to the development phase yet, which is scaling it up in manufacturing, et cetera, or clinical trials of any sort. But there are a lot of good medicinals out there, man. Let me just leave you with this thought, if I may. The pharmaceutical precursor compound intermediol, it is found in quite a few plants out there. And it has anti-tumor properties. It's good for skin lesions. It's good for cancer of the intestine, and a variety of other things. It is these medicinals are the drugs of choice in China, not just an option. They're the drug of choice, and the same in India. You know, Ayurvedic medicine is alive and well, as is ancient Chinese medicine and the medicines of the Polynesian islands, et cetera. You know, this is what they like. So there's so many opportunities in this industry, Shania. It's just unbelievable. I hope your readers enjoyed this. I sure did.
Awesome, man. Well, once again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Hank Laskey. Lastly, you can get his book, The Global Pharmaceutical Industry, Economic Structure, Government Regulation, and History on Amazon, anywhere you get a book. Thank you, sir. Once again, take the time and schedule to talk to I'm Refocused Radio today.
All right. Thank you, Shania.